My father chose to have a medically assisted death. He died in November 6 last year. The process to access assisted dying was not straightforward. My mother, who was devastated by his decision, but understood it, had to initiate the process and find the doctors and nurses with the right training. Because this service was not offered by the palliative care facility where he was, she had to find people who were willing to attend from other facilities. And then, of course, Dad had to go through all the interviews, the paperwork, and the cooling off period. At each stage, the medical practitioners tried to dissuade him from proceeding. The reality is that only people as comfortable with administrative paperwork and as determined to work through complicated logistics, arranging in-person meetings, multiple in-person meetings, and so on, setbacks, as my well-educated middle-class parents could have made that happen. When the doctor arrived, he gave what he called his butter chicken speech. "Hello, Mr. Slater, I see you're here with your family. That's lovely. We don't have to do this today, Mr. Slater. I can come back next week or next month. If you would even like to just have butter chicken with your family tonight, we can make sure that you can do that." Dad had to energetically, and to be honest, quite grumpily, insist that the procedure go ahead. Dad was very ill. He was dying and had been moved to a palliative care facility a few months earlier when that became clear. He had excellent care. My mother spent hours with him every day, and he saw his grandkids regularly. He knew that he wasn't going to get better. He would never be able to play Scrabble with my mother at the kitchen table again, or walk in the woods bird watching as a citizen scientist, his favorite thing in the whole world. On top of the daily discomforts of tubes and injections, of being lifted and moved, of interventions and medical procedures, of being rushed to hospital in the middle of the night when something went wrong, my father was afraid that he would lose capacity, that it would come the moment where he would lose the ability to make choices and to understand what was happening to him. He knew he was going to die, and he wanted to do it in the bright light of day, surrounded by his family while he knew who we were, before he could be incapacitated by pain or by pain medications. He was ready to go. He didn't want to risk gasping out his last alone and afraid in the dark of the night. My middle sister and I live a long way away from my parents, and his choice meant that he knew we would be there and that he wouldn't die alone. It gave him the comfort that my mother wouldn't have to cope alone, coming home from the hospital alone to an empty house. Originally, only my mum was going to stay in the room during the procedure. But as the nurse was getting things set up, my mum gestured for us to stay. And the nurse said to me and my sisters, "Don't feel like you have to leave. This isn't going to be traumatic. Your dad will fall into the best and deepest sleep he's ever had. He'll probably even snore a bit." And that is exactly what happened. Mum climbed into the bed to cuddle him. We girls held his hand. I got to hug him. And he told us he loved us. He told us to look after my mum. And he fell asleep. He did snore a bit. It was beautiful. I wish that death for myself. I wish it for anyone who wants it for themselves. I don't mind if you would never want this choice for yourself, but please, please don't prevent other people from choosing it for themselves. We should all have the right to choose.
That was Lorna Slater, the former co-leader of the Scottish Greens, urging MSPs to back assisted dying in an extraordinarily powerful speech in the Scottish Parliament on Tuesday night. It was just one of many eloquent and passionate contributions during the final debate on Liam MacArthur's Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill. In the end, MSPs rejected the proposals, which would have seen Scotland become the first part of the UK to legislate for assisted dying, by 57 votes to 69, with one abstention in the form of Health Secretary Neil Gray. David, we were both in Parliament until late into the night last night following this debate. And I think it was probably one of the most remarkable moments I can remember in covering the Scottish Parliament, just in terms of the weight of the issues at stake, the quality of many of the contributions. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was quite something, to be honest. Some of it even was quite hard to watch and listen to. It was very raw, a lot of personal stories that some that we hadn't heard before, weren't aware that were being obviously held back for the final emotive debate. I do think the Scottish Parliament gets a lot of criticism, sometimes validly, for kind of ignoring the people at the kind of the centre of a lot of these issues, but you can't really make that criticism here. This was all about the people involved in this issue. I thought the arguments, even on the kind of details of the bill, were very robust, which we don't usually see. There was no politics in it really at all, which is something that we're not really used to in the Scottish Parliament. Everything is whipped. Obviously, this was a free vote. But even on all those amendments we've seen in the weeks before, having MSPs having to make their own mind up on every single one of those hundreds of amendments, I think meant that they had to kind of immerse themselves in the whole debate. Whatever the outcome, whatever you think of the outcome, I don't think you can say that it hasn't been scrutinised and it hasn't been given kind of the fair hearing that something of this nature and this seriousness really kind of deserved.
Yeah, and it's worth at this point maybe actually listening to a bit of the closing speech by Liam MacArthur, the MSP behind this bill, on Tuesday night. And by the time he was speaking here in this kind of segment you're about to hear, it was pretty clear that the bill was going to fall. And this was really his sort of emotional last-ditch appeal to those MSPs who might be wavering.
We must recognise, however, that not passing this bill has consequences. The issue won't go away. Indeed, numbers affected will only rise. All we do by putting off changing the law is push decisions overseas and behind closed doors. So as I did at stage one, I urge MSPs to have the voices of dying Scots at the front of their minds when they come to vote. Presiding Officer, I urge members to listen to Lisa and the many, many like her who desperately need us to give dying Scots more choice, more dignity, more compassion, and I move amendment in my name.
That was Liam MacArthur urging MSPs to back his bill in Holyrood last night, and there was loads of other powerful contributions, not least from disabled MSPs Pam Duncan-Glancy and Jeremy Balfour. Here's a little bit of what Pam had to say in the chamber.
There will be disabled people whose struggle is so hard that they've given up hope, given up fighting, and will be considering tonight taking their own lives. I know this because I have been all of these people I've described. They live in fear every single day, worrying about what new limit someone else will put on their lives and what little power they will have to change it. They live every single day without choice at all. It is inconceivable to suggest that the introduction of assisted dying is about choice when disabled people do not have choices in life. In a world where so many have little or no choices, we cannot risk making death the only choice they ever have. If this bill passes, in a world of inequality, it will be easier to access help to die than help to live. That's why I'm asking colleagues to vote against this bill tonight.
That was Pam Duncan-Glancy urging her fellow MSPs not to back the assisted dying legislation. And Rachel, this is the third time that Holyrood has debated assisted dying. The late Margot MacDonald put forward a bill in 2010. We then had Green MSP Patrick Harvey putting forward proposals in 2015. Both of those fell at the first hurdle, but this bill got all the way to stage 3. And it really did feel like it was on a knife edge in the run-up to the vote, didn't it? I mean, it was very hard to predict where it was going to go, partly because of what David said. It wasn't along party lines. It was a free vote. People were voting in terms of their own conscience, but also just because there was this small kind of segment of MSPs, maybe about half a dozen, who genuinely were kind of wavering and could go either way.
Yeah, I was expecting the vote to be a lot closer than it actually was. I think it was 69 votes to 57. If I've got that wrong, please tell me. But I thought it was going to be maybe 3 votes, 2 votes. I thought it was going to be close as that. So that was quite surprising. But yesterday, so I was not there last night. I was watching it on my phone in my bed last night. But I was there during the day yesterday. It was just really fascinating just to see the atmosphere. There's all the protesters on both sides outside the Parliament. And you could see people everything in the Parliament happens in a place called the Garden Lobby, and you were seeing people literally walking through the Garden Lobby and being grabbed, being like, have you made up your mind yet? Have you thought about this yet? It literally was right down to the wire when it came to some people's decisions there, which was really quite fascinating just to watch and see it all happening in Holyrood yesterday. It was quite the day. Yet, this is what's really interesting. It's the third time that we've discussed assisted dying in the Parliament. It has got the furthest ever got. Years of work went into this by Liam MacArthur and his team, so I can imagine he's probably feeling exhausted right now mentally and physically after all that work. They all fall at the last hurdle. So what happens now? Because it seems, depending on which research you look at, it seems that the public want this, that they want this option to be opened for people, and that's not what's happened here. So it's really interesting. Like, what do we do now? Liam MacArthur is most likely going to get re-elected at the election in May. Does he bring it back? Is it too soon to bring something like that back? Or is it the right time when all the research and all the campaigning and the momentum is there? Does the government bring it back as a government bill? That would perhaps see a bit more party politics come into play there. It might be more likely to pass if it's a government bill as well. That being said, we know that this government that's in position currently has got a lot of criticism for doing bills that are too complicated or not covering the legislation properly. Could it wade into that territory as well? So where does the bill go from here? We know it's not going ahead right now. This bill's done and in the ditch now, but moving forward, it feels like there is still that momentum, there is still that want from the public for something to happen. Is there then the political desire to keep it going when there's so many other issues that are going to come to the forefront after this election?
Yeah, and I think one of the fascinating things about this debate was that all of the party leaders were opposed to the bill. There wasn't a single one that kind of came out and supported it. And I think that would probably be the block of the government ever doing anything like this, is that John Swinney, currently the First Minister, is opposed to assisted dying. But Andrew, it's worth saying that MPs in Westminster have voted to pass similar legislation, but I think it's currently stalled in the House of Lords. Looks like it's not really going anywhere. What's the latest in that? And how do you think that UK debate fed into what was happening in Scotland?
Yeah, so we had the vote quite a while ago. I think it was in June last year, where MPs voted for assisted dying. I think quite importantly, those Scottish MPs voted against it. The 29 of them voted against it of the 57, but the SNP abstained, so it was 29 out of 48, so a relatively decent majority there. And yeah, it got passed, though. I would say largely because Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, he wants it. He wants assisted dying, even though it's not a government bill, which some people have kind of criticised. They feel like it's a bit of a government bill by stealth. It's not got the same scrutiny as a government bill would have, the same amount of time. But yeah, at the moment, the House of Lords has tons and tons of amendments to it, which it's been alleged that it's a bit of a ploy so that it will run out of time and not happen. And that's kind of what looks like happening at the moment, that the parliamentary session will end. It won't be able to pass. And this frustrated quite a lot of people, even those who aren't in support of the bill, because obviously the Lords isn't elected, and it's not their place to block bills actually at all. They don't have the powers of doing that. They're just doing it on the sly in this case, or allegedly doing it on the sly. But yeah, I think that had a big part to play in those few MSPs who ended up not backing Liam MacArthur's bill. I think had everything been going, I guess, swimmingly sort of thing, and Westminster had been given royal assent, then more people would have been inclined to do it. But the prospect of Scotland having legalised assisted dying and it not having happened in the rest of the UK, I think definitely spooked some of the MSPs, because they're worried about what would happen there, how it would all play out. And there was also an issue where there's a few things that were within Westminster's competence, so like whether nurses and doctors could opt out of it. Now, the UK government had said if Holyrood passed the bill, it would allow for these measures to go forward. But I think that just gave a few people who weren't sure, who perhaps didn't have strong opinions personally on it, it meant they were slightly more cautious than they would have been, and in the end, they were more, they were more conservative, small c conservative with their vote. Went against change. But yeah, I think what you said, Alistair, about the leaders not supporting it is really crucial, because probably it passed in Westminster because the PM supported it and because people wanted to go with the PM if they didn't have a strong opinion. If John Swinney had been supportive of it, I'm sure there would have been some MSPs who, again, didn't particularly have strong opinions but would follow their party leader in this instance, and probably the same in with Scottish Labour and with the Tories as well. So, it might come back here in Westminster. That's a possibility. I think partly because of the way in which the Lords have blocked it, or could be blocking it. But yeah, it's obvious that Westminster has influenced Holyrood in this instance.
Yeah, and I should probably clarify, when I said the party leaders, I meant the three main parties, obviously the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. Their leaders backed the bill. But David, Liam was quite clear when he was speaking to the media after the vote that this issue is going nowhere. Rachel's obviously touched on this in what she was saying. But he was saying that the Scottish public overwhelmingly support a change in the law. He believes many of those MSPs who voted against the legislation will come to regret their decision. Do you think it's inevitable? I mean, I know this is a debate you followed quite closely and you've done quite a few kind of big long read analyses on this recently, but do you think it's inevitable that similar legislation will be brought back before Holyrood in the coming years? Or do you think this vote, the result of which was not as close as many believed it would be, do you think it's kind of settled the issue for, if not a generation, then for a period of time?
I don't think there's any way that this has settled the issue. It doesn't feel like it at all, no matter what side you're on. And Holyrood voting in favour of the general principles, that was the first vote we had last year, I think kind of gives, not a mandate, but gives that indication that Holyrood is open to this issue. And obviously we're going to have a new set of MSPs in the coming months who may think differently. I'm not sure they'll rush into it, but I do think something will come back. We touched on the UK government there, and I do think it would be a lot easier and it would allay some of those fears if it was able to be done on a kind of four nations basis. Or I know there's a similar legislation in Wales as well at the moment, which is not as far along the line as we've had in Scotland, but but it is moving. So that would be one option to the campaign. I can't see it being a government bill up here just because John Swinney and Anna Sawar are totally against it, and they won't go for it. But it would make it, as Rachel said, a lot easier to kind of manage. I do think there's a little bit of fear-mongering, I have to say, about the kind of agreements that the UK government would need to put in place. It was fairly robust. And I do think maybe some of the opponents were maybe seizing on that little bit of uncertainty to to put their case forward. Whether this, I don't think it's going to come back straight away in the next Parliament, but I don't think the campaign's going to go away anywhere. More people are going to die in Scotland in the coming years, and more people are going to have a horrible death that we've heard about. Liam MacArthur brought up Brian Churcher and his mum, Tracy, who I spoke to last week, gave quite a gruelling account of her son's death that we reported in Scotland on Sunday. And these people are desperate for other people to not go through what they did. So I think the emotion helps as well to make this issue not go away. But it's unclear what kind of form that will come in. I can't see Liam wanting to do this again. Given he's spent 5 years and he must be, well, he said he's absolutely devastated that this has happened. You could kind of see in that closing speech, I was sat directly behind him in the chamber as he gave that closing speech, and he was trying to be calm and not angry, but you can see it was quite difficult not to vent that frustration. And as you said, telling MSPs that they're probably going to regret this. He's put a lot of work into it, and I don't think he would want to personally go through that again. But there are many other MSPs, some who will be back in the next term, who you can see kind of carrying that flame for those people and those campaigners that aren't going away.
Rachel, Andrew, what do you think about that? Where do you think this kind of debate goes next? I mean, one of the points the supporters of this legislation sometimes make is that this will only become more of a pressing issue because people are living longer. That comes with all sorts of illnesses, and that people will this will come to a crunch point in the coming years.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that almost everybody at this debate agreed on was palliative care. While there was a variety of opinions on assisted dying legislation, I think everybody in the chamber was in agreement that palliative care needs to get better in Scotland. One of the big fears was if there wasn't access to palliative care, perhaps somebody would be more likely to go for an assisted death, for example, or that it might take funds away, investment away. So perhaps that's maybe what needs to be looked at next before bringing back a new piece of assisted dying legislation. Perhaps there needs to be more of a focus on making sure that access to palliative care is fair across the entire country. There's not a postcode lottery in place. Make sure it's funded properly, staffed properly, for example. So maybe that's where the focus in the short term then needs to be. And then maybe further down the line, once the worry about is palliative care up to standard, once that worry is out of the way, then perhaps assisted dying legislation could be brought back, because I don't see any. There's so many barriers right now to bringing it back too quickly. If it was going to pass, this was the chance, and so the fact that hasn't happened, it probably will be a while before it's brought back. I can't see it June this year. Somebody saying, actually, I'm going to take it up. I don't think that's going to happen, but maybe the route to go down now is palliative care, making sure the investment there is proper.
You, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think really so what will happen is it will eventually get passed at a UK level. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes in England, and then in Scotland they'll either follow suit. Well, I reckon they would probably follow suit. I don't think it will be done from the UK government for the whole of the UK, in part given that the Scottish MPs support it and MSPs have rejected it. But I think the whole thing, actually, the real stumbling block is probably the Prime Minister and the fact that he wouldn't do it as a government bill, even though he really supports it and they're kind of doing it on the sly. If he come out and said, we're doing it as a UK government bill, but I will allow MPs to do it as a vote of conscience, and they can opt out of it, they're not going to get whipped on it, then that would have been a lot more upfront. We would have had a longer process. There would have been a much bigger debate on it at UK level, which would have then led to a bigger debate at a Scottish level, rather than it being rushed at the end of the parliamentary session in Scotland, which I know obviously the bill came in earlier, but it ended up quite manic, really, didn't it, with late nights sitting because we've got an election coming up, rather than why did it not happen beforehand. So really, I think it could have passed in Scotland, and it could have been coming in England if basically the Prime Minister had been a bit more upfront about it. And I just don't think that's a very good way to do politics. Like, I know it's a contentious issue, but if it's something you believe in and you've essentially got one of your MPs to introduce it, then you should own it and say, this is something I actually really strongly believe in. And the PM's talked about his own personal situation. I think most people would understand that as well. But I think that's where the issue lies. But I think it will definitely pass again down here, because there's so many MPs that just are annoyed at the Lords for getting in the way. And I think really it's kind of what happens with a lot of issues. If it happens in one part of the UK, generally other parts of the UK follow. So I think that'll be how it'll pan out in the end.
It'd almost be quite ironic if that's the way it turned out, because Scotland was seen as almost pioneering in this regard. And if we then just followed suit after it's introduced in the rest of the UK, it'd be quite a strange way for this to work out. But I mean, I sort of appreciate that the way the parliamentary process worked in the end, it felt like it was being sort of, not enough time was being given, in the sense that Parliament was sitting late into the night. But I also feel like we've had quite a long debate about this in Scotland. It feels like the issue was very sort of thrashed out. But I'm sure this is something we will be talking about again at some point in the future. I don't think it's an issue that will completely go away, even if there's now a break from it being a parliamentary process. But as I say, I've been covering politics since the end of 2017. I'm not exactly a veteran, but I do think this was one of the most powerful debates I've ever seen in the Scottish Parliament. I know there's some criticism that I saw on social media about many of the speeches being sort of anecdotal and personal rather than sort of diving into the legislation itself and kind of properly, well, what these critics would say is properly scrutinising it. But this is such a personal issue, and I think it's very hard to separate it from those personal experiences. And ultimately, it is those personal experiences that have created this drive for a change in the law. But as I say, I'm sure it's something we'll come back to. In the meantime, please check out Scotsman's website for all our coverage on this. We did a full live blog with a kind of blow-by-blow coverage last night. We've got a big kind of long read-up on it. We've got analysis. We've got video. So please check that out. And please do also pick up a copy of the paper. Thank you very much for listening.